Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 just got its biggest update ever, and in fact it just got 2 updates. Patch 1.2 dropped just yesterday. This brings tons of fixes and even other changes to the game. There's some incredibly notable buffs and nerfs included here, so pay attention in this video. Several aspects of KCD2 are just a bit different now. The update was about 62.5 gigabytes on PC and 55 gigabytes on consoles. And as you probably noticed, there was a second hot-fixing update that came out earlier today, this being an additional 5 to 10 gigabyte download depending on platform. The second update addressed some of the performance issues that popped up with the original release of patch 1.2, which we'll talk about a bit later in this video. And hey, if you just want to keep up to date with everything going on with KCD2, get subscribed. I have a lot more content coming. But first, patch 1.2 did come with some major new free features for the game, such as the Barber mode. 2 new Barbers are added into the game. You could find Barber Fiala here, and they do get a new map marker with a little comb. Alternatively, the Kuttenberg Barber is right here next to the bathhouse. The cost at these barbers will vary, but it'll be around 30 groschen, perhaps a bit higher or lower, and you could select a new head and facial hairstyle from a list of several options. And this is just your hairstyle. It's not like you could change the color of your hair or anything else. And after you do conclude the transaction and get that new hairstyle, you'll look a bit different in KCD2 and even get 2 free charisma for a couple of days as a nice passive buff from that haircut. But of course, another huge aspect of this update was the release of official mod tools and Steam Workshop support for KCD2. And this really is a multifaceted release. You can find over 100 mods on the Steam Workshop right now, and installing these is seamless. Just click subscribe and it'll start working in game almost instantly. Although do note that some mods did break with the hotfix earlier today, so just be wary of what you're downloading. Even some of the new mods aren't actually working right now. There are a plethora of cheat mods available already. You can make it so herb picking is instant now, cutting out that timely animation. Or hey, one of the more popular options, no more save your snaps required to save the game, so instead you could just save freely in KCD2. Warhorse got in on the fun, releasing several mods of their own, such as the helmet of Henry VIII. This helmet looks hilarious, and it is a real-life helmet. This thing really exists. And in game, it even has some nice charisma stats for your character, and there are even some mods adding in more custom armors for purchase. This example being armors that are typically reserved for other NPCs, but now are also available for the player to buy as well. And of course, adult mods that I can't really show you in this video, and even things beyond all of that, like gameplay or damage-related mods are available right now. But honestly, a lot of these new mods are kind of a facade right now. A lot of these mods are just being ported over to Steam Workshop from Nexus Mods. So it's not like they're actually new, they're just newly listed here. Because the other major aspect of today's update was the official mod tools themselves getting released, which in many ways is an even bigger deal than the Steam Workshop support. These new tools make it so a lot more is now possible with KCD2 modding. So if you're somebody who followed the modding scene of KCD1, we're basically in a whole new world here. These tools open up so many more possibilities. Warhorse was actually working with mod authors behind the scenes over the last few months to get these tools out and ready. So these have already been tested by some of the veteran authors from KCD1, and the possibilities here are pretty much what you were hoping for. New quests, new armors, and even new maps are all on the table here. Like, if you're wondering if this is a Skyrim level of moddability for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, yes, this is. The question is more, will modders stick around long enough to actually complete projects on that insane scale? Because technically they are going to be possible, but stuff like that is going to take years to complete. And something pretty special is already on the way on this front. For some time now, a team of authors have already been working on a major mod, currently known as the Champions of Bohemia. They shared some concept art with me and are recruiting, but basically it's a smaller DLC-sized mod aiming to implement a completely new map with a castle that's set in winter. You're not going to be Henry here, but instead someone else, and it's going to be more focused on survival mechanics you'll have to deal with while experiencing a new story that's taking place around this area. So yeah, the release of mod tools is just the beginning for KCD2, and I'll have a link down below to the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 modding Discord so you can stay up to date with all of the current happenings. But honestly, what ended up becoming the single biggest change from patch 1.2 overall is the removal of this tutorial message while riding a horse. Yeah, this game will no longer continuously yell at you for holding down certain buttons, but overall, patch 1.2 is a bit of a unique one in that it had 5 months of dev time behind it. Leading up to the release of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Warhorse branched off the game, so they had a stable release build, but then separately another build they could tinker more, and that's the patch 1.2 build. As such, a ton of little things around balance and other gameplay aspects were tweaked in this version of the game. It's been 5 months of random random and miscellaneous changes. So we do have this cumulative impact where a bunch of small changes are now kind of carrying a very large impact on the game. So as a simple example, you might load into the game to find that, oh, you're over encumbered, or maybe you now have way more carry weight available. The weights for a ton of different items were reworked here, perhaps the most notable with those being heavy armor weights. Helmets had their weight doubled in many instances. This Italian bassinet went from 5 pounds all the way up to 13, and the rest of your armor, particularly with body armor, is now going to be far heavier as well. Some of the 5-pound chest pieces are now going to weigh 25 pounds. Leg and hand armor did get an increase, but mostly it was only by a pound or two, so this is a lot easier to deal with, and even most of the horse items got a weight increase here, so your horse probably has less carrying capacity. But my carry weight overall also went up notably. It's not entirely clear why carry weight was increased almost across the board with this update, but it was, so you should have more room to hold things, but also your armor just got a bit heavier. And part of this is an effort to better distinguish between armors, as their durability was also reworked here. So helmets saw buffs to durability. Some gained a few points, while some others gained a lot. Certain helmets went from 27 to 40 durability, which will mark a dramatic increase in how long they last and how many hits they can take. But on the flip side, body armor is a very different story. Durability of body armor was nerfed almost across the board, and majorly. Some pieces of body armor now have half the durability they had previously, so those chest pieces will require repair a bit more often now. And really, when you take together the durability as well as some of these weight changes, it almost feels like Warhorse was trying to make it so you make armor decisions differently now. Instead of just picking the armor that has the highest defensive stats, you should look a little bit deeper, because you might notice that, oh, that armor that has slightly better defensive stats also has way more weight and just isn't worth it. Or maybe you get 1 to 2 more defense, but for half the durability, so it might be better to take the worse armor that'll last a lot longer. So items like chainmail have this defensive trade-off where, yeah, they don't have as good of stats, but they do have really high durability. And really, where some of these weight changes are going to be felt is when you're looting valuable chest pieces off of fallen enemies. Things are going to be a lot more annoying for those loot goblins now. Although thankfully this will mostly just apply to armor. Most of the weapon stats are largely the same after this update. At least when it comes to most of the categories, because the one category that did get some change-ups is polearms. Although unfortunately, these polearm changes aren't as big as many were hoping. The main damage stats for the polearms will be the same, like the actual ones you could see in your inventory. But several polearms did get their minimum strength requirement lowered. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, strength basically adds to your damage. So if you have 6 strength, you can do full damage with the billhook. But the strength differential increases damage. So if you move to 12 strength, you'll do even more damage with that billhook because you are above the strength value it requires. The higher the differential, the more damage you'll be doing. So considering a few polearms did get their minimum strengths lowered, you'll now deal slightly more damage with them, but overall they're still pretty mediocre. Moving backwards got nerfed with this patch as well, which is honestly the bigger impact. Specifically, there's going to be this new slowdown effect, so when enemies hit you and you react to the hit, you kind of get planted and you can't run away from enemies hitting you as easily now. And in gameplay, you could definitely feel this. I'm normally just walking backwards from enemies, and with patch 1.2, or really 1.2.1, it just feels slower now. After this update, I found that switching to free look was even more valuable because going into this free look mode will make it so you could walk back much faster. But since you're not able to walk backwards as fast overall now, it'll make it so you can't really abuse the range of polearms nearly as much. You're still pretty close to enemies a lot of the time. And the big issue is these polearms just don't deal enough damage. They're handy against some of the lower tier enemies in worse armor, but as you get into some more extended back and forths with higher tier enemies, you're just not dealing enough damage to make these polearms viable. So I think unfortunately the vast majority of the time, you're still gonna rather use a sword. Although the polearms did get a nice price increase, so you'll probably be looting them more often now. And there are even some more general combat changes beyond that. A ton of animations were updated, so you should see some of these new visuals. Master Strike got some changes, so now when you trigger this when using a short sword and a shield, it'll actually deal more damage, I think. A lot of the patch notes for this update didn't actually specify whether it was a buff or a nerf. It would just say something was changed around a stat, but not which direction the change was. So messing around with Master Strike using this combination, it certainly feels like a buff. I feel like I'm taking down enemies more quickly, particularly when you consider this is just a random short sword I found on the ground somewhere. You used to be able to basically run up to enemies and just kind of spam attack them before the lock-on kicked in, and this would prevent them from drawing their sword, so you could take down enemies really fast this way. Unfortunately, that was removed. Now you can actually prevent enemies from drawing their weapon by spam attacking them, and even further, when you transition to this free look mode, your attacks will be slower initially. Although thankfully this will also apply to you, so enemies attacking you won't block you from drawing a weapon anymore. This update also saw a huge overhaul to the prices of a bunch of items in game. There's some new money making methods that are very viable for the early game. They rebalanced the influence of an item's quality on its price, which I found to mean that some of the high tier armor is now even more expensive, particularly when you're getting to the really top end stuff. Some of these items got a 1,000 groschen increase in price. Thankfully, not everything's more expensive. Certain pieces of horse equipment became cheaper and more accessible, like a Birdle with plating randomly got cheaper, but overall, most of the horse equipment will be the same. Shields got way cheaper. The lower end ones saw a massive 70% drop in price, making them way more accessible in the early game, but this also means it'll almost never be worth it to loot and sell shields. They're just not that valuable anymore. But honestly, I think this is a good thing. With how many game mechanics are tied around using a shield, I think it's good that they're very accessible regardless of which point you're at. Jewelry got a more general balance pass. Overall, jewelry got more expensive with this update, so if you had a bunch, congrats, you can now sell it. But in general, you should do a pass through all of the jewelry you have and see which things you want to equip because there are buffs and nerfs. Some of my rings lost some charisma value while some others gained charisma. Notably, Godwin's ring, a quest item, got a huge buff from 12 to 19 charisma. So if you weren't using this already, you probably will want to now. And even the spectacles got buffed up to 26 charisma from 25. Only one extra, but hey, it's really nice to have one extra charisma. Although what you'll find is most of the jewelry in this game is now going to be even worse for stealth, with more conspicuousness and noise. Those are two very important stats, so I would definitely take off jewelry from those stealth builds. You might screw yourself. A ton of herbs had their sale prices overhauled, so you'll find certain herbs are selling for 5 times to sometimes even 7 times the value. It still is not going to be a ton per herb, so you might go from 0.2 to 1.4 groschen per piece, but with a ton of these, you loot multiple at once. With certain herbs, you could loot up to 20 in a single key press. So some of these price changes can be pretty impactful. I would definitely say collecting, drying, and selling herbs in the early game is now a very viable strategy. Just spending a minute or two around this starting town, I was able to easily make 40 groschen right from the start of the game. So I would say as you're starting a new character, this is probably one of the easiest and most accessible ways to just get some of that initial money that you'll need for doing regular tasks. Several perks got changes with this update as well. The Warmonger perk got a really nice buff. This is going to be a level 14 main level perk that will increase your strength, agility, as well as other combat skills for 6 hours after you win a fight. And the changes, now in addition to all of those other benefits, it'll also increase your chance to land a hit on an enemy, basically making it less likely that an enemy dodges or is able to counter your attack. It's hard to tell exactly how much of a difference this is making, but to me it felt pretty nice. After successfully blocking an incoming attack from an enemy, I felt like that follow-up was landing a lot more often with this perk now. The Against All Odds perk got a visual change. This one buffs up your stats when you're fighting multiple enemies at one time, and now when it's actually active, you'll be able to see it next to your health bar. Opening Strike got reworked. This makes it so after you land a hit on an enemy, landing additional hits is even easier. Previously, you needed to land a hit to an uncovered zone for this to trigger, so basically an area where the enemy wasn't blocking, but now it's been reworked to just any landed hit. And yeah, that's a really big buff. If you're somebody who has issues with kind of breaking through an enemy's guard, Opening Strike is now going to be a very important perk for you to take, because if you ever are able to get through their guard, it'll now become a lot easier to continue to do that. Although, oddly enough, none of the in-game perk descriptions appear to be updated for these changes. In my own testing, it certainly felt like they were working, but yeah, it's not actually reflected in game. And lastly, Train Hard, Fight Easy will now work on ranged weapons, which is honestly a huge deal. Train Hard, Fight Easy is that perk that lowers the strength requirement of weapons, and it means ranged weapons basically just got a flat damage boost if you have this perk. Like I mentioned before, the differential between the minimum strength required and your current strength increases damage, and this perk will contribute towards that. Stealth got a variety of balance changes with this update as well. Pickpocketing NPCs got notably easier. Here on the old build, I got noticed almost instantly by Osina in broad daylight on both his front and rear pockets. On patch 1.2, the rear pocket is somewhat similar, with me only getting an extra second, but conversely, the front pocket is dramatically different, where I can pickpocket him for 12 seconds now. Again, on the older build of the game, I was noticed almost instantly here. And testing this out on other NPCs, it tends to hold true. I found that pickpocketing enemies, particularly when using their front pickpocket was a lot easier on patch 1.2. Stealth items across the board were rebalanced. I checked this out comparing some of the starting stealth items you get, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Items generally got lower conspicuousness, which determines how quickly guards will recognize you as a thief. So it'll take longer for a guard to realize that you're committing a robbery. As well as noise is massively turned down on a lot of items. Across the board, you'll just be quieter in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 after patch 1.2. But visibility is going the exact opposite way, where visibility is now way higher on tons of items, including stealth items. Some stealth items had their visibility doubled. So overall, what this means is, as long as you stay out of sight, stealth will be easier now. You'll be quieter and harder to recognize as you're sneaking around. But walking past unknowing guards is a lot harder, and if they're already looking for you and kind of know what to look for, they're going to see you a lot more quickly because you're going to be more visible. But once you actually break into somewhere, you're going to be a lot quieter and a lot harder to recognize. The patch notes mention new stealth items being added into the game, but I haven't been able to figure out where these items are, and I honestly can't even find anything online about these. Let me know in the comments down below if you found any of these items and where, but several stealth items were renamed, so perhaps that's what they mean by new stealth items? For an example, here, this used to be a simple hood, now it's known as a wanderer's hood, and of course, several of its stats were changed with the overall stealth balance pass, but it's not really a new item, it's just a reworked old item. And I would say overall, stealth got a bit of a nerf with this update. Stealth kills are a bit less likely to succeed with this update, so you're just going to fail more often, and when taking down enemy NPCs, they're far more likely to make noise now, and even other NPCs are more attuned to hearing nearby stealth kills, as well as some of the other more egregious crimes. So if you're going around some of these major towns just taking down people left and right, you're going to have a lot more trouble now. People will hear you, recognize you, and just notice you more often. But for some of the general thievery and sneaking about, things should be relatively the same. And actually in Trotsky, and really on the Trotsky map overall, many locks had their values decrease, so lockpicking will be even easier now. This so you could actually level up lockpicking and eventually get to some of the hard and very hard locks. Patch 1.2 also brought a really nice performance pass to the game, but like I mentioned a bit earlier, there was a bit of an issue with this one. Immediately after downloading the update, tons of users noticed suspiciously low performance on PC, where instead of having 10 to 20 more FPS, they had 10 to 20 less FPS after the update. Thankfully, this was just a bug, and a mere 15 hours later, aka earlier today, Warhorse dropped patch 1.2.1, which seemed to completely resolve this problem. And now, having tested things on all three updates, the oldest one, patch 1.2 and 1.21, there's definitely a nice performance bump from all of this. It seems like low NPCs got the bulk of this, and part of this is just going to be the fact that DLSS 4 was added into the game, which previously was just using DLSS 3. So the updated upscaler is going to bring a bit more sharpness, but also a couple of extra FPS. And to be clear, this still doesn't feature frame generation, it's just standard DLSS 4. But yeah, mid to low NPCs are seeing 20 to potentially even 30 extra FPS on patch 1.2.1, while higher NPCs are getting a bit less, but I'm definitely noticing a nice 5 to 10 FPS bump in quite a few different locations. On the mid to low end, this is a game changer. You might even be able to bump up other aspects of the game's visuals because you have more FPS to play with. Although, beyond all of that, there are a variety of other smaller changes as well from this update. Food is going to spoil a bit more quickly now. It wasn't a huge difference in my testing, but over several days, food will lose more points. The blacksmithing minigame got some fixes and should be a bit easier overall. Alchemy got some visual improvements with this update. Now the liquids you pour will look a bit better. You can notice quite a bit more detail in the poured spirits here, but also the fire and overall lighting should be improved, which, yeah, kind of. I feel like the fire is a bit fuller as well as the shadows a bit more extreme in the updated version, but overall, Alchemy still looks pretty similar. Bozena's hut, that starting house where you begin the game, got a fast travel point now, which is a really nice feature. Some exploits were fixed. You can no longer loot the balanced die endlessly from the starting chest, and beyond all that, a mountain of bugs were fixed. This patch included 1,000 fixes to bugs, and yeah, unfortunately I can't go through all of those, but all of the major issues, whether you're on PC, Xbox, or PS5 in particular, were addressed from this update, as well as many of the quest-related progress blockers or other issues were also resolved. But with that in mind, that is patch 1.2 for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Let me know in the comments down below, what are you thinking about this update? To me, it's a bit of a mixed one. On one hand, I think some of the fixes are amazing. The size of the update and how much was changed is just absolutely amazing. And the fact that we're getting mod support so soon after release is a really big deal. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is hitting a special chord with a lot of players, and the fact that we could have some of those players diving into mods this early on just gives mod support a way higher likelihood of succeeding and blowing up for this title. But at the same time, I certainly feel like these patch notes could have been a bit better, especially when they were hyped up a bit on the developer stream. So many of the changes from this update weren't really that descriptive. Like, it was just saying something was changed, but not actually saying what. I want to know if the damage went up or down, if my food is spoiling more quickly or more slowly. The patch notes didn't actually include that detail, which I feel like is really important. And overall, I feel like some of the changes just didn't go far enough. I feel like polearms could be over-tuned. Obviously, it's a single-player game, you could mod that stuff in or even just tweak the difficulty with mods in the future, but hopefully between this patch and particularly the next one, which is adding in hardcore mode, we do see a more comprehensive damage pass to all of the items in the game, so some of the lesser known stuff is a bit more viable. With that said though, I'm still loving Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and have way more content coming, so get subscribed.